For members of the public that may be joining us, this is the Point of the Mountain State Land Authority Board. My name is Lowry Snow. I'm one of the co-chairs. The other co-chair is our Lieutenant Governor, Henderson, who's asked to be excused. And from time to time, she's asked Mike Maurer from the governor's office to join us. And he's here, and we welcome you, Mike, as part of our meeting here. And if you have questions or comments along the way, we welcome them as well. So with that, and jumping into the agenda and moving forward, just as way of background, there is a tremendous amount of work that goes on. I don't want to say behind the scenes, but as members of this board that we don't see, that's being directed by our director and Steve and others, our consultants. A tremendous amount of work. Since our last board meeting, we have met with 12 developer groups to get input on framework plan and proposed land disposition. We've held a public open house, conducted a public survey, met with our working groups, reviewed 130 applications for Director of Operations position, and explored on-demand transportation solutions at the point, coordinated regional transportation opportunities, consulted with potential advisory committee members, and reached out to housing advocates, and even more than all that. So Steve, Alan, and our consultants, all that have participated in that, Muriel, thank you very much for your work that's gone on since our last meeting. Some of that work we will discuss further today becomes points of our agenda. Let's go to public comment, the next matter on our agenda. This is a public meeting, and our work is about a public project. And so this meeting is open to the public, and we welcome public comment. We haven't always had a lot, but we always want to make room for that, subject to the rules that we've adopted. So with that, if there's a member of the public here, I think CC, you asked me before if we would have them raise their hand. How do we know if they're wanting to make a comment?
I think, Alan, go ahead.
Function on Zoom, and we'll be able to see that and call on those individuals.
Okay, all right. Well, I see a screen. I don't see any hands, but Alan and Cece, if you're monitoring, if there are hands up, would you let me know?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Not hearing anyone coming forward and not seeing any hands, we will move on to the next item on the agenda, which is to consider approving the minutes of our last meeting held May 11th, 2021. CC is always great at keeping the minutes and getting them to us. I would entertain a motion to approve those minutes, and also include in that motion if you see any changes that need to be considered. You don't have to propose changes, but I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll move that we approve the minutes, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. A motion by Jim Russell. Do I have a second, please?
Second, Mayor Walker.
Mayor Walker, thank you for the second. Moved and seconded to approve the minutes of May 11th. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay. Motion carries unanimously. The minutes for that meeting are approved. The next matter on the agenda is to consider and approve our budget for year 2022. By law, by statute, this board, our land authority, is required to pass a budget for the following fiscal year and accomplish that by June 22nd of this year. So Alan has worked hard in developing that budget so that we can hear it today and approve it today in order to meet that statutory deadline. So with that, Alan, we'll turn the time to you to talk about what you've prepared and the background on it.
Thank you, Representative, and it's good to see everybody today. This passing a budget, of course, is one of the fundamental responsibilities of this board. And as Representative Snow said, we've got some statutory responsibilities. One is to pass that budget by the 22nd of June for the following year. We also had a requirement to post notice of the budget in a newspaper of general circulation a week in advance. We met that deadline. We also posted the proposed budget as part of that. And as you know, I sent a draft a couple of weeks ago seeking input from board members, see if there were questions on the draft before we made that public. I received a few questions, but no suggested changes or concerns that were raised. But having said that, let me share my screen and we can talk through that budget. As kind of a starting point for the budget, we looked at what we did this last year, fiscal year 21. Also, it's based largely on the information that we provided to the legislature as we sought an appropriation for this year. So it's consistent with that. With respect to the fiscal year 21 budget, we actually are coming in under budget for the year by, we'll see as we get a little bit closer, but the projection is that we'll be at least $200,000 under budget for fiscal year 21. That can be attributed to a couple of things, but primarily the fact that we did not hire an additional staff member partway through the year as we contemplated at one time. So that saved us some money. Didn't spend as much on some of the legal work as we had anticipated, because that's going to be coming up this year rather than in this past year. So we'll have a carryover there. We also got a nice appropriation from the legislature, some additional ongoing and one-time money. So heading into fiscal year 22, we'll have nearly $13 million available. I will say that that was based on the understanding that that money would carry us forward in terms of operations for roughly 4 years. Members of the legislature and the Appropriations Committee suggested that they provide a larger amount of one-time money last year, but spread that over a few years of operations. So as we look to this next year's budget, we do have additional money in there for personnel on the assumption that we will be hiring a couple of significant positions. One, this director of operations that will handle a range of administrative functions, be able to take over some of my responsibilities when we have needs for having another public face involved in this. Also hiring a director of land development. Again, a very significant position, looking for somebody experienced that could work very closely with the development community, be involved in implementing the planning that we've been doing. We didn't use travel money last year, but with things opening up, we likely will have opportunity for some travel. There may be some opportunities for board members to go and see some of the analog projects we've identified and the lessons that can be learned and shared with as we move forward. We've got substantial funds in there for legal services. We anticipate some costs involved in developing an interlocal agreement with Draper on roles and responsibilities. We anticipate starting putting together deals with developers. Those will be complex legal documents that will outline the transactional strategy and the relationship. We've built in money for administrative processes, for our consulting services, continuing to work with our strong consulting team. you can see those numbers there. They're down a little bit from this year because we had some early expenses getting started. So I think it'll be somewhat lower this coming year. We do have new money in for development partners. Now, this is kind of a placeholder. We're not sure yet exactly what the deal structure with potential development partners will be and whether we'll have to come up with some early fee money to start some of the work at the site. Don't anticipate that that'll be a lot because we're not expecting the prison to be moved within this next fiscal year. And so there may be a limited amount of work that can be done, but that provides us a little money if we need to do some early development work on the site. Got money in for a master scheduler. We're going to start seeing a number of moving pieces here. And there are those that develop very detailed schedules that chart out critical path to ensure that we're not missing anything and we keep on schedule. We may need some work on public finance as we start to think about the structure of tax increment financing. How do we pay for some of the infrastructure and the transportation needs, potentially for parking or housing needs? So we need to bring in some partners to help think through those complex details. We've got a little budget for that. We'll be talking later today. Committee. This $300,000 is the amount that we suggested to the legislature. It looks like we likely will be below that, but that would allow us to bring in some high level, some of the very few people around the country that actually have extensive experience in developing large scale, complex master plan communities. So we believe that there's an opportunity there. And again, we'll be talking about that further. The studies is a big number, but there's an awful lot of work that needs to be done to get into the details of our plan. So what does that mean? It's things like developing a much more detailed sustainability plan. It's smart city programming, which is a very complicated process, as you might imagine, to develop a smart city and takes specialized expertise. We may well need a master association at this site. People pay association fees and would need to do a study to see what would be required, what those fees might be. Really importantly, developing design guidelines for the project. A very detailed book of what the design of streets and different buildings would be, the standards that we would expect for engineering and architecture and more. A landscaping piece. We've been talking about a circulator system that requires its own special attention in planning. So a number of these kinds of studies, if we want to really dial in and get this project ready for development. So that's what that's for. Don't have anything for infrastructure and demolition work. As I said, we don't anticipate being able to get access to the site during this coming fiscal year. That's a number that we'll see increasing in the future. And as we've learned, there's a lot of uncertainty in these projects. So we built in a little bit of contingency for an overall budget of about $3.9 million. So that's the proposal. I know you've seen that, but with that, I think I'll turn it back to you, Representative Snow, and see if there's discussion on this budget.
Thank you, Alan. Board members, questions or comments? Questions for Alan or comments on the budget?
Alan, I've got a question on the studies and that. Have you included anything in there for, I know that we're trying to pull together internally all of the hazardous material studies that we have for the prison to see what needs to be updated and what needs to be surveyed still. Do you have anything in the budget for an overall study for that? or anything for cultural studies or wetlands delineations, wetland studies or anything?
I haven't put that in. We did do the initial study that DFCM conducted and didn't identify issues related to cultural resources or wetlands. But no, didn't add additional for those particular studies. The number that I've got in there is based on contacting a number of groups around the country that do these kinds of things and getting estimates of what a budget would be. If anything, this is potentially on the low end. But to answer your question, no, I haven't put anything in for the hazardous materials studies or review.
Other questions? Thank you, Jim, for the question. Other question?
I had one, Lowry. Alan, are you anticipating that it'll be our job to handle the demolition? Or is that what you're thinking? Or do you think, I guess that's my question. Are we going to be in charge of the demolition as well?
I think that's a very good question, and it's one that Jim and I have had some early conversations about. And I think there's still a bit of a question about whose budget that goes in, whether it's ours or DFCM. But those are things we have to work out and discuss before the legislative session. As I said, there's nothing in there now because we don't anticipate that work occurring during this next fiscal year.
Maybe then, Alan, as a follow-up to that, if what other department might that fall on? Would that be corrections or one of Jim's other departments?
I might let Jim weigh in on this, but I know DFCM oversees the facilities that the state manages, and you know, one way or another, we're going to have to pay for the demolition, and I think the legislature will play a role in determining whose budget that goes into. But yes, I think the likely candidates are DFCM or the Point of the Mountain State Land Authority. We don't have responsibility for that site or that facility at this point, but as I said, I think that's subject to further discussion.
Well, I think Representative Snow, that it could land virtually in any budget, but the responsibility to do the work and oversee it would fall to us for any state agency. I think it's something, Alan's right. We have talked about that a little bit, and I think that there'll be some good ongoing conversations on what makes sense to push off to the development and what might make sense to just go ahead and do now. However, as part of the demo, we have the hazardous materials abatement, which I believe that we 100%, and JC, we've talked about this as well, because the state would never be relieved of the liability there. I think that we would certainly want to do the abatement. Some of that can be done in demo reasonably, depending on the materials that are there. And so that's where it starts to bleed together a little bit, and may make more sense for the state just to do the demo and clear the site rather than to pass that on. But I think that's something that we have to do a little cost benefit analysis on to see.
Sure.
This is April. Yeah, Jim, thank you for that. I just wanted to say, in my experience with selling off land for the federal government that has buildings and stuff, they're definitely doing the demolition for reasons like Jim said, because of liability. And the reality is, if you don't put the money in to do it, you're going to take a discount on the sale of the land because the buyer is going to factor it in anyway. So it's going to cost us regardless of how we do it.
So let me give you a real live example. We bought the road home a year and a half ago for $4 million. And largely interestingly enough, the buildings were a lot of the valuation of the property, a lot of the value of the appraisal of the property. But we went ahead and abated and demoed the buildings there. We spent about $200,000 or $300,000 doing that, and we sold the property a year and a half later for $6.75 million as bare property.
Well, and it's easier to do it ahead of time than the buyer discount it because it's unknown. So you might take a bigger discount if the buyer has to do the demolition later. So I think that just needs to all be factored in. And probably the only question is whose budget.
Right.
Thank you, April and Jim, for your responses. Given the nature of the development that we anticipate on this property, it will be, in my opinion, really important how the demolition is handled and our environmental assessment work. But that probably goes beyond what we need to talk about today. Other questions from board members on the budget?
I have one, please. Alan, in the under consulting services you have in the engineering, we had $225,000. We had $250,000 there in the FY21 revised. Did we spend any engineering consulting funds there? And how come you're dropping it? You're proposing a drop to 100. Could you flesh that out a little bit, Alan? Thanks.
Yeah, no, it's a terrific question. And actually, a lot of that money that was budgeted for engineering went into the planning work. That's where we covered the difference in the cost there. It's down this next year because we anticipate that if we enter into some agreements with development partners, that part of the deal would be they would be covering their own engineering costs. So this is money that could go into some of the research that Jim mentioned. It's money that we may need as part of planning as we look at some of the infrastructure that we're doing. But again, the reason it's down is because we would anticipate a developer coming in to do their own engineering work as part of their deal.
Gotcha. Thanks. Makes sense. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Representative. Further questions? If not, this may be a good time. In fact, it is a good time to entertain a motion to approve the budget so that we can meet our deadline under the law.
Chair, this is Senator Fillmore. So moved.
Thank you, Senator. It's been moved, and do I have a second, please?
I'll second.
Thank you, April. It's been moved and seconded that we approve the budget as presented by our director. I'll place that for a vote. All in favor of that motion, say aye.
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 Any opposed, say nay. Motion passes unanimously, and the budget accordingly is approved. Thank you again, Alan, for your work on putting that together and for meeting with the various folks you had to meet with in order to complete that. The next item on our agenda, item number 5, is titled Select Advisory Committee Members. You will recall as a board that we approved creating an advisory committee composed of highly experienced, sophisticated developers of master plan innovation communities to advise the board and staff on a range of issues, including the viability of the master plan, the developer selection, how we vet the developers, make sure that we work with folks who have the wherewithal, how to structure the deals, the land disposition issues, including marketing and pricing, the development in phases and the process, and as I said, marketing, financing, and much more. Members of the committee of this board, you will recall, and Aaron, with your help, I don't know how many meetings and discussions we had leading up to landing on this structure of an advisory board. And Steve, you were a part of that, but we had a lot of discussion. But I think we all felt comfortable that the best structure was the creation of this advisory board to help us with those issues that I've identified. And so through a process that's been overseen by the Division of Purchasing, we reached out to recommended candidates and asked them to apply. all of the candidates have decades of experience in developing large, complex master plan communities, the kind of thing that we are all undertaking here. None of the applicants has any conflict that we believe would preclude them from serving on the advisory committee. A subcommittee consisting of Jim Russell, Representative Steve Handy, Mayor Troy Walker, Aaron Talkington, and Steve Kellenberg, along with Alan Matheson, has met with each of the applicants to discuss the framework that we've approved in our master plan and our proposed development process. And by the way, thank you, members of that subcommittee, for your willingness to participate in that process. So today, we now propose going into executive session for the purpose of discussing the qualifications of those candidates. Just as a reminder, the law allows us to do that as long as we keep the discussion centered around the qualifications of the candidates. So with that, unless there are any questions that any of you have leading up to this point, I would receive a motion to retire to executive session, reminding you that it takes a 2/3 vote to accomplish that. But before we take that motion, is there any questions about the process up to this point? Alan, have I missed anything that you'd like to add?
I think you summarized that very well, Representative. Thanks.
Thank you. So could I have a motion, please, for us to move into executive session?
Mr. Chair.
Representative.
Yes, I didn't hear who that was.
I believe that was Dan. This is Dave. I'll second it.
Okay, Dan, apparently you have made the motion that we move into executive session, and who was the second? Was that Dave?
Yeah, Dave.
Thanks, Dave. It's been moved and seconded that we move over into executive session. I'll place that matter for a vote. All in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed say nay. I believe the motion carries unanimously, which meets clearly the 2/3 requirement. Now, for all of you members of the board, CC has given you 2 calendar entries, one that's labeled executive session. Am I right about that, CC? So if you'll go to your calendar and find the one labeled executive, it allows us to go into that virtual closed session to discuss these candidates. So we'll see board members over in that virtual room in just a few minutes. Okay, I think we're all back.
I want to see Colton's face so I know we're on the right link. Because
You're good.
okay, Colton's here. Okay, good.
So everything's right with the world now, right? Colton's here, so.
That's right. He
Okay.
takes care of everything for us.
Well, thanks, Colton, for doing that. I'm trying to see Alan. Do we have Alan back with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. He's kind of our security blanket too, so we want to make
Yes.
sure.
Looks like we have our board members back.
All right. I will entertain a motion then that we come back into public meeting, public session.
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative Handy. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, April. It's been moved second. We move now back into public open meeting. All in favor of that motion, say aye.
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 Any opposed, say nay. Passes unanimously. We are now back in open public meeting. The item on our agenda doesn't require action, but I think it is the position of our director and the subcommittee that we discussed that we move forward with taking action as a result of the interviews with the applicants and the need we have for their assistance. So with that, I would entertain a motion to take action. Let's get a motion on the table if we can, and then we'll take discussion.
Mr. Chair, I'll go ahead and handle that as a member of the subcommittee. I move that the consultants that as named Mr. Don White, Mr. Jim how do you say that last name, Alan? Zambrini?
Zaboral.
I was close, Zaboral. Be engaged on a, well, what do we call this? They just be engaged as a consultant in the consultant and developer arena.
Thank you, Steve. And I need to catch the name of Mr. Zamoro, first name.
Jim.
Is it Zamboro?
Zaboral, Z-B-O-R-I-L.
Zaboral, right.
Okay. So it has been moved that the board retain the applicants Don White and Jim Zamboro as our consultants to the board, given their credibility and expertise in major development. Do I have a second to that motion?
This is Dave. I'll second.
Was that Dave?
Yeah.
Dave seconds that motion. So now let's take discussion on the motion from any of the board. So let's go back to you, Representative Handy, as the maker of the motion. Would you like to speak to the motion?
Yeah, we had a thorough vetting. The subcommittee was engaged that I was a part of, and others that have been spoken about. We spent nearly a full day interviewing, screening, visiting with 4 candidates, and upon the recommendation of our subcommittee, have determined that we would recommend to the full board these 2 individuals as stated and as discussed.
Thank you, Steve. Further discussion to the motion from any of the board members? Not hearing any, we will place that motion for vote. All in favor of the motion to retain the services of Don White and Jim Zamboro if I've said that correctly, say aye.
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 Any opposed, say nay. Motion carries, and the record should indicate that it is this motion is based on the compensation that was outlined by Alan, our director, Alan Matheson. And Alan, we're all aware of those terms, am I correct?
I believe so, and they were included in the invitation or solicitation that we sent out through the state process.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your help with that action. The next matter on our agenda is the summary, an update from Alan, Aaron, and Steve on the work that they've done in consulting with developers. They've been working with about 12 different developer groups selected through an open and public process. Those groups have provided input into our proposed framework plan and also the development approach. So Alan, Aaron, and Steve, we'll turn the time to you to walk us through a summary of those discussions.
Thank you, Representative. Maybe I'll just give some overview remarks and then turn it to Steve and Aaron. As you know, we've recognized all along that it's important that we plan a development that can actually be built, that's viable and feasible. And so at your direction, we reached out to developers around the country to get input on our planning process and some of our development approach. As is our process, we worked through, we did this transparently and publicly by sending out a request for expression of interest around the country. We had 15 very strong developers respond. We reviewed their submittals, identified 12 that we would interview, and had a great group. Steve and Aaron were involved. April Cooper was involved as a representative of the board. We had representatives of SOM that participated as well. And I'll just say it was a long process, hour-and-a-half interviews with each of the 12, very instructive. We learned a lot. And later in the agenda today, we're going to be talking about the plan itself and getting your input on some key elements of that plan. To give you foundation and background for that discussion, we're sharing with you what we heard from the development community, and then you'll hear from Muriel about what we heard from the public through our survey. So I think with that, I'll turn it to Aaron and Steve and let them summarize for you what we learned from the developers.
Thanks, Alan. I think Steve and I are going to split this up to try to run through it fairly quickly. And, you know, I'll just say as a quick preface that we heard a really wide range of opinions and direction on all of these topics. And I think that reflects, you know, the discussion that we've been having with the board, you know, over the past year, which is that there isn't one way or one perfect way or one right way to do this. But I do think we got some really valuable input that will help us refine our approach and think about, you know, how we proceed going forward and make sure that we're really designing and planning for a successful project. So the first question that we asked these developers was about the you know, role of developers in the project and the role of the state, and who should be doing what, and whether it's appropriate for the state to be taking care of the infrastructure up front. And you know, I think what we heard, Steve's going to click the animations for me, is that it's just really critical for the success of the site that one organization is guiding the whole, right, and making decisions with the whole in mind, whether that's infrastructure or where development starts, or which parks to build first. And then developers were not worried about the state playing that role, but we heard it unanimously across the board that there needs to be one organization in charge of that. And so we heard some other variations on this concept that Steve and I are exploring, but I think we got some resounding consensus that, the idea of the state taking care of the infrastructure and some of these broad goals is appropriate. The second piece of that concept and part of the role of the state in putting in some of that early infrastructure is so that we could divide the site into smaller districts where you could have different developers taking different districts. And we've heard really clearly from you all that you're interested in getting competition on site. You want there to be lots of opportunities for lots of groups to participate. And so, this strategy would create that. We had designed this based on the idea that maybe it would be use driven, right? There's more of an office district, there's more of a residential district, there's more of a mixed use district. And I think we heard pretty clearly across the board that actually would be really tricky. In most cases, developers want multiple uses because they think that it makes for a better place. And it balances market changes and revenue needs a little bit better. And so we're thinking through exactly, how that would work with the district strategy. But I think either way, really what we're working on right now is making sure that we've got a first phase that will drive initial success, so that we're working on something that will drive success for the rest of the project, and regardless of how we set up those districts going forward. The third question, which leads naturally from those first two, right, is okay, well, great, we found a partner, we know where we're building first, how do we transact? And so there's two strategies that we really propose to developers, largely to make sure that we could leverage the state's land authority and all of the hard work that you and others on the call are doing to come up with a viable plan and guide the development. And so what we really heard, is that a land lease, which is the easiest and very cleanest and simplest options possible, that's certainly been something that the state has done elsewhere. Most developers preferred if we could find a fee simple approach, where at some point the land would be sold to the private sector. And we heard some variations and hybrids, but I think that we really came away with the idea that there's an optionality here, but we need to think about how we might get to a fee simple or offer a fee simple option. So these next two pieces are kind of more conceptual questions, making sure that we're kind of gauging developer appetite and alignment. So we talked about housing affordability and tried to understand how groups had been addressing this in their existing projects and what they thought how we should be considering here at the framework plan level. And the biggest thing I think is that people are really comfortable with the idea of setting some of these goals. And, they like the idea of having clear direction up front. What they really want is flexibility on how to achieve those goals and targets over time, as opposed to such a really strict, rules basis that if there's something creative that would be really beneficial for the site, that they can do that and count it towards the affordability when it's appropriate. And this last piece is a question of anchors and catalysts, knowing that economic development and attracting companies to the site is really important and really critical part of the development. And across the board, developers love anchors and catalysts, right? The question is how you integrate them. And so we actually got the most feedback on the innovation hub and the accelerator, some of those concepts that we've thought about, how you have an institutional anchor or other groups and whether those are together or separate. And we heard really clearly that actually cross-industry collaboration is the most important outcome of some of these different options. And so we ought to be really centralizing and combining those elements so that we get the maximum benefit for the site overall and for the state.
Steve, you're on mute.
Aaron, are you done? This is Lowry asked me to step in as a chair pro tem for a minute. He had to step away. Are there any questions for Aaron?
I'm finished. I think there's a few more slides that Steve was going to present. We're looking at this land use plan just to round out the discussion, but
I had one.
I can't hear him.
I had one
No,
question.
I was on mute. I'm off now. I'm sorry. I was
Okay.
talking, but go ahead, Troy.
I just had a question just to clarify. When you talked about and I think it was, you said was unanimous amongst the developers that you spoke with, the fee simple is kind of where everyone wants to go, I guess. Is that across the board with respect to those that build this kind of stuff?
There was a variety of opinions there. If we're going to do any for sale housing on some of these western areas of the site, it's going to be very difficult to do any of that on a leased site. It's been done, but it's hard. It limits the people that will finance it. We heard kind of two schools of thought. One is that a lease creates a true partnership. And so decisions really have to be made in conjunction between the developer and the state when you have a lease, because you're going to structure it so that decisions are made in everybody's best interest. The second school of thought is that you really are limiting the pool of people that can participate in the site, and the number of banks and other groups that are willing to finance and consider the site, as an investment when it's on a lease. And we see that changing a little bit across the board, but based on that feedback, and also some input that in fact, because this was not long-term going to be an institutional state-driven user, right? There's no state anchor on site, where it makes sense for the state to long-term control the land. That in fact, fee simple might actually be both an easier transaction structure and, in benefit to creating a great mixed-use community, similar to what we've been planning.
Thank you. And Troy, Mayor, I'm back. Thanks for covering for me for a minute. Thanks, Aaron.
So,
other questions of Aaron before we move to Steve? All right, Steve.
Sure. Well, we also asked questions about the actual framework plan itself and the direction we were going in the planning, and we circled back around to this notion of the districts and whether or not they agreed with sort of the district allocations of land use and its approach, and I think everybody was supportive of districts as kind of an organizing element. However, one of the things we did find was, again, that they would see these districts as sort of their own mini master plan. And in doing so, we're leaning towards greater product diversification so that they could, move through a district faster. And of course, in doing that, then the districts start to become more similar to each other and become more head-on-head competitive. So we found ourselves in a bit of a dilemma relating to this, the district concept, but we also recognized that they were seeing it through the lens of a developer who would own a certain piece of land and wanting to maximize the value on that piece of land rather than how the total composition works together, in synchronicity. So quite a few questions raised on this, which will deserve a little bit more discussion downstream. We also talked about the village core or the central core itself, and we gave them several different models of the density and the character of what that central core could be, as well as we brought in the notion of entertainment, and could live entertainment be an activator for the core and give it higher value and accelerate sort of absorption and values. And it was very interesting on this that they generally sort of hovered around sort of a medium density core, not too low density, but not too high density. They believed that an early phase would be lower density than that it could. Later phases of the core could be higher density. They like the idea of it not feeling like a shopping center per se, but more like a real downtown with multiple uses. Everybody was very supportive of entertainment. And although the scale of entertainment should be sort of on the more modest side rather than major entertainment venues, but they felt that would be a very powerful piece of the core, even in early phases. We talked about housing mix. and talked about the range of housing densities that we currently had in the program. I would say that the majority of them felt that we could be fairly bullish on density, even in the early stages, as long as we were able to pull off a first phase of the core of a retail entertainment component, that would help leverage some higher density housing up to 4-story with structured parking in early phases. That wasn't unanimous, but I would say there was a strong support majority along that. But they also felt that we should sort of boost the for sale single family detached and townhomes in our program. They felt that a ownership component in the housing program would be additive and would create a more stable and a better, more balanced population mix, for the project. We also talked about parking in depth, and our concept of a one-car community, where we created an environment where a 2-income family wouldn't need 2 cars. They could have one, and we identified and shared this sort of toolkit of different modalities and mobility options that could support a lower car ownership, including the idea of satellite parking structures, and discussed how do we get from surface parking to structured parking sooner so we can have a more compact footprint and a more urban environment. They were fairly conservative on this piece, on the parking, and felt that, yeah, these are all great ideas and you should pursue all of them. However, in early phases, parking really needs to be market driven, and because it's a very auto-oriented environment. And they were afraid that if we were too aggressive on reduced parking, it would be punitive to their leasing. And also, in order for them to get financing on their projects, they need to have fairly market-driven, parking requirements. They did say, though, that if we wanted to move to structured parking sooner in order to get a more compact footprint, it would probably require some financial support, some TIF financing for parking. And they've seen that in a lot of similar projects, and we're highly encouraging on trying to pursue some type of support. And the last piece was, this notion that we've been pursuing of a pedestrian priority zone, an area that was fairly car-free. And they were very supportive of this idea, although they did shoot up some flares in that you have to do this very carefully, because what you don't want are dead zones that are not activated. And so it needs to be done with very, very carefully, with car-free zones, well activated with adjacent uses and eyes on the space, and so forth. So anyway, those are the main points that we got from them on the plan. And overall, they're supportive of the overall plan, although there were some questions on the district organization and the districts as a development land delivery system.
This is April. Do you guys mind if I take 2 or 3 minutes and just kind of talk about what I saw from a board perspective sitting in on the meeting?
No, please do so, April.
So could definitely, all the developers that we met with, I thought were really great. They're very talented and brought great ideas to us. You could definitely tell that there was a little bit, they're flat out saying there's no chance that they can be altruistic. They're not looking at this as a 20 or 30-year project, and we're looking at it as a potentially long-term project. And they're looking at it the other way. What district can we get in, make the quickest return, get out? So I think if we want people to stay in there long enough to kind of drive it as we want to have it happen, then we're probably going to have to just drive that more, as opposed to having the developers potentially tell us what to do. However, I still think there's a joint venture approach, or kind of meet in the middle approach, so that they can make their return, but we're not 100% driven by their return. I found that a lot of them were saying, like, well, we don't want to be necessarily stuck with the one that's all office near the highway. We want the residential.
April, you still with us?
Sorry. I think
Okay.
I accidentally, yeah, I hit the mute button accidentally.
Okay.
So I think we're going to find some really good partners. I did also kind of get the inclination from a couple of them that, you know, are you sure you want multiple developers in here? Can't you just have one group come in and just take the whole thing and then we'll stage it as you want? But I think because it's such a public process and because as a board, when we make decisions, we're representing the citizens in the state and trying to get some other people involved, or can we, because we're the state, help? Is it even possible to help some younger, smaller developers be able to take a little bit of a piece of it after a master developer or somebody else has come in? I don't really know how that mix is going to work, but I thought the conversations were very, very interesting. And then I thought, okay, this just kind of shows us that although we want to make sure that this is feasible and it works, we also kind of need to stick to our guns on some of the pieces that we want to see happen. If we don't want to see this get developed out super fast and that's all about return, then the state's definitely going to have to put a little bit more money and investment into whether it's infrastructure or parks or the entertainment or the parking.
Thank you, April, for the comments. And I think from where I sit, you've really hit on some points that are going to be part of our challenge moving forward. Is we are not necessarily driven by the bottom line. And that's one of the reasons why we've incorporated, I think, some of the elements that are important to those who have weighed in, members of the public, part of our focus groups and surveys. But we also have to find the right balance and make sure that we provide an opportunity for developers to partner with that is incentive to their bottom line. So it's going to be complex and somewhat challenging, but I think we can find it. And I think, April, you kind of talked about finding that balance. But other comments?
Can I take a couple minutes, Mr. Chairman?
Absolutely.
So just a few that, Aaron talked about the lease versus own discussion with him. I just wanted to get a few things out here on the record. You know that I've been a little bit pro maybe lease to be able to control the land, but the land use authority remains to be a problem or a concern for me, and that could be bridged if we do fee simple in agreements with the city, I imagine. But we need to be able to maintain long-term land use. Mayor Walker is great to work with, and he's really supportive of the project, but he won't be the mayor forever, and the council will change there. And I think that the state needs to maintain control over the land use and how that's developed there long-term. The initial infrastructure investment that we're talking about to be a catalyst is great, but I think we need to be sensitive. If this property was sold fee simple right out of the gate, that would be seen as a great boon to Draper City and might cause issues to other areas within the state. I think we just need to be cautious and sensitive of that a little bit because we haven't gone in for an undeveloped area before and done that I'm aware of. Return on investment, to fund this infrastructure, we may need to use a TIF or some other method. So the ownership of the property is going to be important there. And I get that the developers are not keen on leasing, and it might cause them a little bit of financing hardships, but it doesn't preclude that. And they can fund it on a lease as well. I just, and maybe there's a combination of a short-term ownership versus a long-term ownership, but I think there's a lot for us to figure out and discuss there, but I'm a little skeptical, in this. I wasn't involved like the other members were, but it seems like this group is a little bit more, this is what we want, not necessarily what the state needs. So I think we need to be a little cautious of that.
Thank you, Jim.
That's it.
Other comments from board members?
I'm curious about the makeup of the call it the focus group of developers. Were in terms of did you interview Utah-based developers, some of our premier Utah developers, and well, without being specific, whoever wants to respond to this, Alan or whoever, but just describe the makeup of these developers.
Yeah, I'd be happy to respond. We put together a list of literally dozens of the top developers that have experience in large-scale master plan communities, out of state and in state, and sent invitations to them to participate. But we also sent out a broad invitation for any developer to participate. And that was sent out over the state system. And so we had some come in that were invited, some that came in on their own, and went from there. It was a really good mix. I think we had, as I said, 15 total that responded. 10 of those were national companies and 5 were local developers.
Thank you, Alan. Anything further, Steve?
Yeah, maybe one more question. I mean, this is a subjective part of this. I mean, was there enthusiasm to say, boy, we can't wait to get our hands on this. We can't wait to get going on this.
There was a lot of enthusiasm. I think we heard regularly, this is a great project, one of the top projects in the country. And many said that they are anxious to participate in subsequent processes when we start selecting partners. So, and in fact, many of them wanted to use this time as a time to pitch themselves and market. We kept that to a minimum and instead spent as much time as possible diving into some of these key questions. And anyway, I again learned a lot. I think the things that Jim and April outlined before are very much on mind and will lead to important discussions with our board, probably at the next meeting as we start making some of these decisions.
Muriel just put in the chat the list of the qualified applicants, and I'm pretty pleased to see some of the recognizable Utah names on there. That gives me some really nice comfort. Thanks, Muriel, for teeing that up for us.
Thanks, Representative and Alan. Further comments or questions? All right, let's move on to the next matter on the agenda. Item number 7, public survey results. It's titled, during May, we conducted a public survey to gather input on elements of the framework plan. The survey was conducted in 2 forms, one using a representative sample and one open to any interested respondent. We're grateful to the public for their input and for taking time to weigh in and to share their views. The public input has been very valuable to our board and in our planning process. So I know, Muriel, we have you present and you're helping us along the way by posting information. We'll turn the time over to you to talk about those survey results.
Okay, thank you, Representative. So as was mentioned, we fielded a representative and public survey in the month of May. And I just wanted to go through a few results with you all. We found that they were very informative. I think it's really important to note that we've done very robust public engagement through the master planning process. Most recently, we've engaged with the general public through an effort that we've dubbed Plan the Point. We really wanted to solicit robust engagement from the general public and key stakeholder groups. And the survey was one tactic to do so. But we also did a number of other things, including meetings with stakeholder advisory committee members. This is a group that we assembled with members intentionally selected to represent a broad and diverse group of influential stakeholders across the state. And as you know, we have our working group members. Many of you board members co-chair those various working groups. We had combined working group meetings with milestone workshops 4 and 5 during the month of May. We also had 2 virtual open houses open to the general public via Zoom and live streamed those on all of our social platforms. We received about 100 people who participated in real time during the open houses, as well as several dozen more that viewed them on our respective social channels. We were able to garner very positive across the board news coverage on the Plan the Point efforts. And we also had a very robust social presence during this time with some social media marketing to really push out the opportunities for the survey and engagement in our virtual open houses to tens of thousands of Utahns. For the survey overview, collectively between the representative survey as well as the general public survey, which just to clarify, the survey questions and format were exactly the same. But in terms of the fielding process, the representative survey was conducted with respondents that lived or worked in the Point of the Mountain region. And we hired a third-party survey research firm who was independent and specializes in conducting surveys to field that representative survey. Collectively, we had about 2,700 responses, which we feel like is a very good response, and it tracks similarly with the number of responses we received last fall when we launched our master planning efforts with the Make the Point survey. We also sent out our information to an extensive list of partner entities, other state agencies, nonprofit groups, local communities via various communications, content tailored to web, e-newsletters, print newsletters, social, and asked them to also get the word out. So we really tried our best to do so. I would say a really good metric that I wanted to point to is that collectively between the Point of the Mountain Development Commission's regional visioning efforts and what we did last fall and what we've done here recently, we've engaged with nearly 10,000 Utahns who participated directly in our open houses or have taken surveys, attended working group meetings. So it's a very, I think, robust number. I'll just go through these really quickly for the sake of time. The survey format, we tried to keep things to 5 to 7 minutes. We see a precipitous drop off in participation after that time. A visual preference survey was how we tailored the first part of the survey. So essentially giving people pictures and ask them to rate their top 3 preferences. The second part of the survey was asking respondents to rate on a 1 to 5 Likert scale their level of agreement for specific statements or selections. So entertainment preferences, we started right out of the gate. Here are the pictures that our respondents saw, everything from a movie theater, live performance venue, activities for all ages, etc. When asked to rank their top 3, respondents there was a clear top priority in many of these questions. You'll see here that folks wanted activities for all ages, which makes sense. They also wanted food or market halls and a live performance venue. Those kind of came out as clear top 3 preferences. In terms of retail preferences, we asked, would people like to see smaller, local, Utah-based retail, neighborhood grocery stores, shopping centers with more national retailers, and outdoor dining and cafes? And, the responses are fairly intuitive here. Folks wanted to see kind of uniquely Utah-based retail and also outdoor dining. When it came to open space, we asked, would preferences be for natural open space, more kind of recreation tailored open space, play areas, or civic spaces? And folks wanted kind of more of these recreational opportunities adjacent to linear open space corridors that are specifically tailored for biking, walking, and running. For park type, we asked, would folks like to see lawns, trails, kind of picnic areas, day use activities, sports fields, or again, kind of this more shared space with civic plazas. And again, kind of a clear preference when you looked at the rank scoring, more of the picnic areas for people to kind of congregate together and just enjoy like a nice picnic or meal seemed to come out on top. When it came to park size, we asked in that range from large to small, and folks wanted to see more of a medium-sized park, 5 to 10 acres. With park features, they wanted to see fountains and play areas. And with trails, they wanted to see more of trails specifically in kind of this open space area, dedicated pedestrian corridors and multi-purpose trails alongside a street specifically ranked lower. I think, it's important to note that we are planning for a diversity of trail types, but that was something that came out, as a clear priority. For transit, I will caveat that when looking at these pictures, the trolley itself looks kind of like, UTA tracks. And so you'll see in the responses that folks ranked far and above their top preference as a trolley. I think in retrospect, we probably would have specifically, changed up that visual so that we would get kind of a more representative response there. But folks generally go to what they know. And so you definitely saw come out on top in the results a preference for a trolley. Street character preferences, whether it's green street with landscaping, an urban street with public space. People wanted more of kind of that green street with landscaping and green infrastructure. There was definitely a clear preference for multimodal options overall, but also a preference for kind of streetscape that, kind of protected the pedestrian and provided for like nice landscaping. We also asked about parking and specifically whether respondents would be amenable to having consolidated parking hubs located throughout the site. And as we heard from Steve and Aaron, this may not be necessarily feasible in phase 1, but there definitely came out as a majority of respondents either somewhat supporting or strongly supporting having these larger parking hubs as opposed to parking for every single office building throughout the site. Folks also wanted, these pedestrian priority zones. There was definitely a clear preference for having zones specifically throughout the site for pedestrians. Educational programs, this was interesting. It wasn't something that, we thought we would see divergent opinions on, and we didn't. Across the board, people just would love to see educational programs for people of all ages. There was a slight majority that preferred the K through 12 educational programs. Housing type was also a bit across the board. And while we don't have time to get into the cross tabulations based on demographics, I will note that people generally responded based on their personal, stage of life. So those that were a bit more of higher income wanted more of the higher end housing. Those that were perhaps kind of lower income were looking more for that entry level workforce housing. So it very much tracked similarly with where the respondents were at. And that is it. The full results are posted on our website, and happy to take any questions that you may have.
Very interesting, Muriel. Great job, great presentation. Questions for Muriel? Thank you again, Muriel. Just let me comment before we move on to the next item, and Alan may correct me on my information, but Alan has said to me on a couple of occasions that when they've begun talking to potential developers and folks interested in the project, that they have commented on more than one occasion about the level of transparency that we have focused on in our planning process. Our efforts to invite the public and invite input has been remarkable, and So thank you for that, Muriel and Alan, and in keeping that theme. I think it's been really important and helpful to our work. So let's go to the next item on the agenda. I know our time is waning a bit, and but this is an important topic, as we're now heading into the final stages of our framework planning process, and we need to make some decisions to guide the plan refinement, to put some final touches on it. So SOM is here and will outline the status of planning, where we are, and also get some direction from us on some key points. So with that, Peter, I think you are with us. We'll turn the time to you or whoever you recognize.
Thank you, Representative Snow. Hi, everybody. It's Peter Kindle from SOM. I will present a brief overview of our stage 3 document, and I'd also like to present 7 recommendations that we're putting to the board today so that we can advance from stage 3 into stage 4. And I think it's really exciting that the developer response, the public response, and the advancement of the plan are all coming together in a very nice way. As you recall, we did develop 3 framework alternatives in stage 3. They had differing levels of development area, 60%, 55 in the middle, and 57.5 on the right. I know physically they look relatively similar. There's a few differences that we'll talk about today, and the purpose of the presentation this morning is to get some decisions on those differences, and so that we can advance into stage 4. So alternative 1 is 60% developable area, very much in keeping with standard industry practice. It's a mixed use plan, as they all are. I think the key attribute to this alternative is the development of the northwest corner here along Bangerter that is proposed as residential. Option 2, or alternative 2, is 55% developable area, and the major difference is that the northwest portion of the plan is set aside as a community park, essentially a sports field, or a series of recreational sports fields. The third alternative that we've presented to you before is 57.5% developable area. Again, the major difference is that a portion of that northwest corner along Bangerter is developed. So there's some other nuances which I'll walk through as we talk about the recommendations. I won't repeat what both Steve and Muriel have done a great job in terms of summarizing different comments. We've had numerous stakeholder meetings. We've had 2 public presentations, as Muriel mentioned. And I think much of the feedback that we're getting from the public actually is very much in line with the concepts that we've been developing in the master plan and the framework plan around housing, around land use, around sustainability. So there's really no major discrepancies between what we're hearing from developers, what we're hearing from the public and our stakeholder group with the direction that the plan is going. We do have a meeting tomorrow with the school district, which we're excited about, to get a little more feedback on the school component. As Muriel mentioned, the education element is important. So in order for us to move from stage 3 to stage 4, we do have 7 points of decision that we need to resolve. We've formatted them here today as recommendations for you from the planning team to the board. The first one is around housing, and as Steve mentioned, and Aaron has mentioned, the developers did indicate a strong preference for a higher percentage of housing on the project. As you recall, I think at the last board meeting, we talked actually about reducing the housing percentage slightly down to about 35%. We did that in 2 of the options, but what we heard from the developers and the public is that the need and desire for housing is important. So we're recommending today that we increase that percentage to about 40% of the land area would be devoted to housing. So that's most in line with alternative 3. The second recommendation, based on feedback and the development of the design, is the mix of residential and office uses. And as you can see by the colors, the brown being residential and the blue being generally commercial and office, there was a division to the east that was more office, and to the west was more oriented to residential. The feedback we got is to mix these a little bit more. So we're suggesting that a little bit of office move west, potentially west of the dividing boulevard, and then a little bit more residential move east. And we're not talking about a lot. We're talking about maybe 2 parcels, maybe 3 parcels. So it will not materially affect either the development outcome or the land use plan. It'll just mix the land uses a bit more. Recommendation 3, as Aaron and Steve talked about, was a desire for a medium density mixed use core. So this is the core area of the project. You're looking at the Central Park there in the middle, the River to Range Park, and the uses surrounding that. So the idea here was to go a little bit higher density than the surrounding development. And that was the preferred direction from the development community. This would be a mixed use area. And as Steve suggested, this would be analogous to the Woodland Town Center in Texas. So we're looking at 3 to 4 story buildings, generally with a mix of residential and commercial uses in the core area. Recommendation 4 is the Innovation Hub. And as you may recall, we had proposed 2 innovation accelerators. These would be areas of concentrated innovation and incubator space, research and development. One was to the north, one was to the south. The recommendation, as you heard earlier, is actually to centralize that or consolidate that innovation incubator hub in one location so that it has a little more momentum and catalytic energy. So we're suggesting that that would go to the South BRT station indicated by this, this pink circle. That gives the South BRT station a real identity. It's also affiliated with the prison site. So there's a correlation between the reuse of the prison site, the innovation accelerator, and some of the institutional uses that would be more on the south side of the project. So we think that's a really exciting idea and gives some more identity to the south end of the project. Recommendation 5 is the Central Park location. One difference in the 3 design options is the location of the Central Park. That's this green rectangle here. This is the primary civic space for the project. It would literally be the central park for the whole project. It's where civic activities would happen, generally concerts, some of those entertainment functions that the developers were so keen on. So we are recommending that that be located generally in the center to the north edge of the core area, which you can see on the left, rather than on the right here, more to the south and connected to the River to Range Park. The idea here is that it would then have its own identity, and it would also be connected to the North BRT station and this main street on the north side of the core area. Recommendation 6 is the BRT location. We did present 3 options for the BRT location. Here you see the character of that BRT. It would be a gold standard, of course. We've talked about this before, running in its own track, essentially a paved road-like surface. We did look, as I mentioned, at 3 options. One on the left is that it would run adjacent to, but just on the edge of the core on the east and north edges. Option 2 it runs generally through the middle of the core. And option 3 would run on the right, most directly through the parks and then out the north end. We feel pretty strongly, I think, as a planning team, and also was supported by public comment and stakeholder comment, that the one on the left is preferred. This would not materially affect the operational characteristics of BRT because, as you can see, it's actually running in its own right-of-way here without running on a roadway. So even though it looks a little bit longer in terms of length, it actually will cross fewer streets, so it will be able to operate at a high performance level. And then finally, the Jordan River Park area. This is the area to the northwest of the project, adjacent to Bangor. And I think what we have heard both from the board and from other input is that we do not necessarily need nor desire a significant public park in the northwest corner to the scale that we had been showing it at about 40 acres. That was the previous combined total of the green area up in the northwest. So we are recommending today that we consolidate both the community park, which would have some sports fields, with the stormwater park and make that total of about 30 acres. So that would give us about 10 acres in that area back for development. So we think this is a good compromise in terms of providing recreational amenities and stormwater, meeting our stormwater requirements without oversizing that park. So there's 2 options. One is we combine them together. The other is that we keep them somewhat separate. We don't need a decision today, but we're open to comment. The decision today really for agreement is to reduce the scale of those parks. So those are the 7 recommendations that we are putting forward today that will help us move from stage 3 to stage 4. I think we're all extremely excited about the plan. I think the fact that the public and the developers were so supportive of where the plan is today, I think speaks well of the physical layout of the project. And we look forward in stage 4 to advancing some of these areas. So happy to take any questions or comments today.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you for your presentation and for, I hope you know how much we appreciate SOM's work. We recognized at the outset that we put you on a incredibly expedited schedule, and we think work has been really helpful.
Thank you.
I tend to agree with you that I think the public weighing in, as well as the board, but the public weighing in on your work is kind of a confirmation. I hope you believe that, of the value of what you're doing and the direction you're taking us. So I need to understand, Peter, did you say you are looking for a decision on these recommendations, or more general direction? What can the board do to help you move forward today?
Thank you, Representative Snow. I think the procedural issue, I think I'll leave to Alan. These are our recommendations. We do think from a planning standpoint, they make a lot of sense. They're not fixed in stone, so we can always look at variations of them, but we do need at least some general confirmation that these are appropriate so that we can move into the next stage.
Thank you. And let me ask you, Peter, are some of these refinements in these recommendations as a result of getting some input from the developer group?
Yes, sir.
What is it that's
absolutely
moved? Okay, all right.
Yeah, specifically the first 4 of these that have more to do with land use. Those were really directly derived from the developer comments, but I think supported as well by the public comments.
Thank you. Questions from the board for Peter?
I have a question, Peter. These stages, you're asking for a stage 3 recommendation. What are the next stages? Just briefly, can you explain those? Can you articulate what the next stages are? How many stages are there?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Handy. There are 5 stages in the current framework plan process. So we are leaving 3 and entering 4. And 4 really is a refinement and advancement of the plan. So to do that, we need to lock in, not lock in, but we at least need to have agreement on the general major physical components of the plan. So stage 4 will be advancement and refinement of the major plan. And stage 5 will be a summary stage. So we'll be doing final graphics and some renderings, and that will be the concluding stage for the framework plan. So there are actually, to give you a little hint of what we're going to work on in stage 4, we're looking at detailed planning of the phase 1 locations. I won't talk about these too much today, but we're also looking at some roadway refinements to the Porter Rockwell Boulevard. So that's the type of adjustments and studies we'll be doing. We'll also be meeting with, for instance, the school board and different transportation agencies to confirm the technical attributes of these different elements.
I think the other thing we're going to be looking at is, based on input from the development community, there was a strong theme of, the first phase really needs to be successful. It really needs to be dynamic. It needs to have all the land use components. It needs to be very synergistic. And so we're going. You just started to see we're focusing on how do we get that first phase to really sing and have all the right the land use composition and be a really exciting way to hit the ground. So that'll be an important piece of this stage 4. Stage 4 is really finalizing the plan. And then 5 is just documentation of the plan.
Yeah.
Thank you. Other questions for Peter? Okay, I don't see anyone speaking up. Let me ask you, Peter, and I may have missed this, but in these concept plans, I still see the prominent river to range greenway, and I have to tell you, I am a big fan of that. I'm just wondering, how did that sit with developers? Was there generally was that something they liked or didn't like?
Maybe Steve can comment on that, or Aaron.
I think it was roundly appreciated. I think they were excited about seeing the amount of open space we had in the plan. I think that it was strong reinforcement of that. The only kind of sub comment on the open space maybe was, quite a bit of the open space goes into the river to range and also into the park system up by the Jordan River. And there were a few comments about maybe there should be more open space within the districts themselves, to work with in developing the district master plans. And so one of the responses to that is our discussion, what you heard about maybe modifying and reducing the amount of open space up by the Jordan River, integrating the sports, doing a little bit less in the way of sports fields, doing a little bit less in community park, and a little bit less in terms of an ecological park. And that might provide some opportunity for us to expand the open space within the districts themselves, a modest amount. And that sort of rebalancing open space I think would be a response to the development community, as well as it just intuitively makes sense to us as well.
Thank you. And I note also, Muriel, in your survey results, high points for walkways and bike areas, trails, and I think that's consistent with that. Anyway, other comments. So you'll notice on the agenda, this is on for action, and I'm going to recommend. Excuse me, did someone say something?
Yeah, Troy Walker, just one comment. As we look at as we talk about that trail system, that river to range system, which I think is definitely something we need to do. But with respect to getting the river to range, the connection over the freeway, we need to make sure that as we're planning this, we're looking at allocating the funds. I know the way UTA is probably looking at it right now, that bridge may not include, as part of the funded source, a pedestrian bike path with it. So I just want to make sure that we make sure that when we're planning that crossover I-15, that includes everybody, bikers, hikers, walkers, all of it, along with the bus, just so that we have that in the forefront of our minds, because as they do the environmental impact, I want to make sure I think that's the key to connect the Porter Rockwell Trail and the Jordan River Trail. Without that connection, we don't have river to range. We have river to freeway and freeway to nowhere. So. Yeah,
the bridge to nowhere, essentially. So good point, and something that I'm certain that we're going to have to work on as we begin finalizing things, how this will work. But I think it's always been, I think the intention of this board is that we figure out how to get over the freeway, under the freeway, however to connect to the Draper side and the foothills there. So what I was going to recommend with respect to action is a motion, not necessarily for hard action, but for direction, consistent with what Peter said. That doesn't mean what you do here today is absolutely set in stone and concrete, but our consultant planners need some direction on these recommendations. And so if one of you are comfortable in making that motion, we'd consider it.
Mr. Chair, I'm comfortable making the motion that we give them the direction kind of based upon the presentation with respect to the housing. Is that what you're talking about? Number 4, sort of the percentage, and with respect to the alignment of what would be BRT, the most beneficial alignment. In my motion, I still want to include the potential for Major League Sports and Entertainment on that site and fitting somewhere into that northwest quadrant area. I want to keep that in the direction. So my motion would be to approve or to give direction to move forward based upon the scenario with the 40% housing component, the river to range connection being across for trails, parks, bikes, and also still the option of development of something that would give us the wow factor and ability to have, some type of major entertainment as part of that recommendation.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm not going to restate that motion. I think you all heard it, and as I call it a soft motion or soft action, it's direction. And I knew with the mayor making it, he would include something about the ballpark too, and that's okay. So can I get a second of that motion on that motion?
Happy to second that. Second.
Thanks, Representative Handy. In the interest of time, I'm going to place that motion for a vote. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed?
This is April. So no discussion?
I apologize. Let's back up a bit. We won't place it for a vote. Discussion on the motion. April?
Sorry, I just have a couple questions. So Troy, when in 1993, I worked for a AAA baseball team in accounting called the Buffalo Bisons in Buffalo, New York. And they were trying to become an expansion team. So they spent, enormous amount of bond money in New York building a major league field, and then never got expansion. I think at the time, I want to say it was right when I think it was the Rockies and Florida Marlins became 2 expansion teams. But anyway, it's been years and years and years and years, 20 some years since there's been any expansion of Major League Baseball. What is giving people the impression that they're ready to expand, or that Salt Lake City would be on the horizon? Am I missing something here?
It's a question for Mayor Walker.
Well, I'm not necessarily into any group that knows what the expansion opportunities would be. I just think we should leave the opportunity for something. It doesn't have to be baseball. There's other major league sports that might work. I just wanted to keep it open, that it didn't just automatically get developed into housing or something else. I have no inside track on any of it. It's just, if you're asking for what we'd like to see there, that's what I'm saying.
Got it. Okay. No, I think it'd be great too. The weather in Utah for baseball in particular is kind of hard. They'd possibly need a dome because of the snow in the spring. Okay, I understand. So NFL, I mean, there's other, hockey. I mean, there's other sports obviously that could potentially come in. And then there was that rugby group that came and talked to us early on, right?
Right. I just thought that something like that would be one unique opportunity. I was even thinking, this is just me in my mind, of the NFL's minor league football that was actually doing well before COVID took it out. But I think that may come back. I just wanted to keep that as a potential. That's all. Okay.
That totally makes sense. Then I'm okay with it. I just didn't know if we were going to try to dedicate 20 or 50 or a crazy amount of acreage to something like that, and not even potentially have an opportunity to get something like that. Like I said, Major League Baseball competition was tough. There was 10 cities. It's like competing for the Olympics, and you have to put all the infrastructure in, and then a lot of times you don't even get it. So I was just curious. Okay. So thanks, Lowry, for letting me have a couple more minutes to talk about that.
Well, it could be a great spot for an Olympic venue, for the new Olympics coming up, maybe an indoor venue that might work out in the end for something else. Good point, April.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, April. And April, apologize for cutting things off on the discussion. Those are good questions. Further discussion on the motion. All right, let me just say, Mayor, so that I want to make sure that I understand the motion with respect to the ballpark. Your motion, as I understand it, is that we not foreclose that as potentially something that we look at that could be part of the plan. Is that your motion?
That is correct.
At least with respect to the ballpark.
That's correct.
But yes. We're okay. I called it a soft action, or let me just say more that I see this as general direction for our planners, and that's the basis for the motion, as I understand it. Mayor Walker, is that correct?
That is the basis for my motion. Soft direction. Yes.
Okay. Thanks.
Whatever that means. Yes.
Whatever. All right. So we'll now place that motion for vote. It's been seconded by Representative Handy. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed, say nay. The motion carries. And Peter, I hope that this discussion helps you move forward with the next stages. So
thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. The last item on the agenda, business item, is to turn a few minutes to our director to update us on any matters before we adjourn.
Thank you, Representative, and I'll be really quick. Thanks to the members of the board. You've been so helpful in serving on subcommittees, being involved in these discussions and interviews. It makes such a difference, and appreciate your wise leadership. The only thing I'll mention is a little update on where we are in the process to hire a director of operations. As we talked about earlier, we had 130 responses and applications. based on the solicitation that we submitted. Very strong applications, very experienced people, and so I feel very good about that. I'll be conducting interviews with I think 11 finalists, and we'll be narrowing the field down from there, and then involve some board members in some final interviews following that round. So that's the process. Hope to have somebody in place in the next month or two, and feel very good about where we are in the process. Thanks.
Thank you, Alan. With that, before I entertain a motion to adjourn, just please accept my thank you for your members of the board, and also our consultants, our professionals that help us. This is incredibly important work, and the longer I work on this, the more I'm convinced that this will be not just a monument for economic development and a good place to live and to work, but also a tribute to our state in planning process. And you're all a part of that, and can't tell you how much I appreciate your time and dedication and your engagement. So thank you. With that, I will entertain a final motion.
So
Almost.
Thanks, April. And a second, please.
Second.
Motion and second to adjourn. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. We stand adjourned. Thank you again. Have a great week, and we'll visit with you all later.